Look out.
When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide. And I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. And I get to the bottom and I see you again. Yeah. Do you, don't you want me to love you?
I remember 2009 working for a pharmacist called Elizabeth Bredin at the O'Connor Chemist, and she said to me, to quote her words, she said, "I like it when Jean-Luc Picard is assimilated by the Borg," which was, by then, I mean, I had my training in, their brain traps, which I learned about in Tuggeranong to some extent. So that was obviously metaphorical and euphemistic talk for what they call clockwork. So this clip goes out to a number of my friends on Facebook who may have concerns themselves about the suggestion that video is causing paranoia, psychosis, or schizophrenia. I'm going to spend the rest of my life now doing what it is I wanted to do from the start, which is philosophy and art. And I've seen the attrition and hatred that the religious right have towards philosophers and artists who have gotten out of the Bronze Age. Yeah, I mean, once again, now my pain is considered physically disabling pain, and I've had my last run-in, what I hope is my last run-in with Calvary and the Canberra Hospital staff, because their assessors end up finding out constantly that they're believers, and I don't know if there's some sort of citizenry switch of idealism when a prime minister changes. Like I've said before, when Julia Gillard wanted to be the prime minister, I said, well, I looked into her ideology and found she was an unbeliever. So as a kid, I would think how good it would be to have a female prime minister, but that wasn't enough for me to want to vote when Gillard was running for the position. It was her atheism. Because I could imagine many positive changes for Australia if Gillard had remained in power, and I think she still should be. A friend of mine has argued that the Queen had played a role in the termination of Gough Whitlam's power as Prime Minister in the 70s. I don't know enough about the details to have my own point of view to advance, but I'm wondering what it is that that brought an end to Gillard's leadership, because I was in favour of it. I've worked out that people who are young, they look young. There's a theory I've been working on for some time, which I think I'm able to justify in a discussion, where believers essentially go through their four gospels, and I've already talked about some of the differences between the four, but then I think they look at straight-faced young people and they look at their dolls of Jesus, whether he's on the cross or got long hair and smiling with his arms out or whatever, and in the minds of the believers he's many things. They don't tend to talk much about the original gospel Mark and how he was just a target and a murder from the ancient monarchy. but they tend to talk more about the verse I find the most reprehensible pertaining to Jesus from 5 years before 100 AD, 95 AD, which is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that all who believe in him will not perish but have eternal life. And I think that's the most, given what we're told happened in Mark's Gospel, John 3:16 is the most reprehensible verse pertaining to Jesus ever, except with the exception of the verse where it said he's claimed to have said that every jot and tittle of the Old Testament law must be upheld. Because I think originally he was possibly some form of revolutionary who wanted people to get past dogmas in the Old Testament. And in one of my next talks, I will consult and refer you to evilbible.com and some of their content that very fairly indicts the Bible as a source of many, many evils. But what I seem to observe is that if you are young and straight-faced looking in your 30s, it's almost as if these doctors and people in healthcare or cops or whoever are just looking at you going, yeah, he should take the fall for something. That, I think, is the trap that's set by believing in John 3:16. You look like the guy that took the fall for the sins of the world, so you must be into this. You must want to harm yourself or other people, or and then I always have these, I follow through these conversations with people that make these false charges, and they, every time, the ones that say it or even suggest it, every single time, they turn back at me and say, well, I believe, even though they're doctors. And I just think it's atrocious. Like, if you want to challenge me in a discussion, you're welcome to, but just, can you be consistent? When I worked in pharmacy, I dropped all religion of all kind. I focused only on science. The fact that there are prescribers, doctors, conflating their morals and their Hippocratic oaths and what they're trained to stand for professionally, that they're taking it and conflating it with beliefs, Bronze Age beliefs that here in 2018 amount to little more than biphobia. What doctor's going to stand and tell you they believe, and are they going to come forward and say they think outer space is heaven and the Earth's mantle is hell? And I'm sure they don't. They aren't even sure what they believe in, and I know this from debating too many of them. So it's just gutless. I don't want to now deal with. I think I only want to deal with private surgeries and private clinics, because the bigotry that I'm seeing in both Calvary and Canberra hospital staff, with a small exception of free thinkers who know I'm an unbeliever. When I was 19, I ran certain checks on the behaviors of the responses of domestic animals to human appearances. I would try things like completely blacking out my face in cosmetics and drawing bright white pupils, and then I'd go and look at a dog over the neighbor's fence, and the dog would bark relentlessly. But then if I had my face painted white with giant black pupils, that same dog was approaching the fence really friendly. And so I started to make observations like that and think, well, it's kind of superficial in a way, but it suggests some connection between what scientists would call photoelectricity and responses in the animal brain, in canine brains. This was a dog that I had no prior affiliation with, except to look at it twice, once with a black face and white pupils, and another time with a white face and black pupils, and the emotional response was completely different. But what I find to be reprehensible is that these sorts of attitudes that really just boil down to prejudice against appearance and looks absolutely extends to even members of the scientific community, political system, and police force, solely because of how you look and how you speak. And yeah, I guess I don't know what to say. I've got these wonderful African neighbors in the units down near the driveway, and they're quite accepting of me. They often call me brother. They say I walk like a girl, but I think they're brilliant people. Richard Dawkins' book River Out of Eden will talk about in a chapter called African Eve, which is obviously, the title of the chapter is obviously satirical of the Bible, but it talks about the human genome beginning in Africa, that over long periods of time Africans had to flee and migrate out to other countries, and the human race changed in terms of culture, skin tone, forms of language, idiosyncrasies and things like that. But apparently, as far as we go as Homo sapiens, it all began in Africa, which is why I think the film clip Black Tie White Noise by David Bowie is a very special song. It's written in 1993 and I listen to it regularly. But when you hear right-wing psychiatrists and psychologists saying that a person is a danger to themselves or others because of their DNA, and you've looked into DNA and you know that DNA codons show that not only are we cousins and related to other mammals and monkeys, but it even links us to trees. If you watch Neil deGrasse Tyson's documentary series called Cosmos, he'll talk about how we're even descendants of trees. So to my mind, that throws a whole it throws a lot of question marks at the very idea or suggestion that a person's DNA could trigger them to make a violent act. Like, what if the parts of them that came from a tree just triggered them to stand perfectly still and are not in charge against anyone? You know, we don't hear bigoted Christian scientists drawing our attention to that. No, because their savior was nailed to a tree, so it's not going to fucking occur to them. Their murdered, raped savior. Surely, no, there was nothing sexual about Jesus' crucifixion, or sexually depraved, more like it, because, they put the loincloth on him because they thought he had the biggest penis in Jerusalem at the time. That's why they put the loincloth on him. I didn't even want to know what happened before they put the loincloth on him. It makes me fucking sick. Just the thought of it. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. So once again, it's not that I am in any kind of riotistic opposition to psychology and psychiatry in principle. I've looked into a lot of existentialists who I admire. I find their history is questionable. A lot of this thought is said and credited to have been pioneered by people like the Marquis de Sade to some degree. He is credited to have influenced the mind of Friedrich Nietzsche, and when a person is called a martyr, They have to be a martyr to some sort of ideological cause that they stood for and practiced. In my case, well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, there isn't a such thing as an imposed ideological human-to-human exchange between me and anyone else. Don't get aggressive or say you've got to agree to my point of view. In philosophy, I've always challenged and been open to challenges from people to try to justify and persuade the merits of their point of view to me, so I can benefit potentially from it if they have something significant to say. But we know that Friedrich Nietzsche was inspired by the Marquis de Sade. In my studies of the Antichrist, he does make some poignant rejections of a lot of the sayings in the New Testament attributed to Jesus, but they tend to be in what we now know to be the later Gospels, the Matthew, Luke's, and John's, which I don't think Nietzsche in his day was aware of modern Jesus seminar conclusions about gospel datings. We know from Nietzsche's childhood that his father died when he was 5, and he was a passionate Lutheran, I think. His father was a Lutheran minister, so Nietzsche took after his father and loved Jesus and God in his early childhood. And I can see believers turning around and saying this and saying, you know, if a son loses a father or a parent, or there's a certain ensemble of intense humanistic loss, they start to wax psychology and go, well, that's no good reason for them to lose faith. But conversely, their faith was, in the first place, instilled by the very parents who they lost, and these criticisms tend to come from believers whose families are still intact and they're still practicing the same faith. And so is it hypocritical for people who have been believers their whole lives to look at Nietzsche and say, well, Nietzsche, you lost faith when you were 5 because your dad died? Because that's a discredit to Nietzsche, because he I see him as doing what I've tried to do, which is to take loss and create art and philosophy in order to transcend your loss. I see Nietzsche doing the same thing, but I suspect anyone who was born or raised Christian is going to be left... I disagree with the psychological term a repressed Christian, because by definition a Christian accepts, we must say at least, as Bertrand Russell did in his essay Why I'm Not a Christian, there's criteria to be a Christian. You've got to have a belief in the biblical God, an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and all omnipresent, everywhere, all the time, that sort of God, as the creator of the universe. So you can't harmonize that with, the works of Lawrence Krauss in the universe for nothing, and Victor Stenger's work on cosmology, and their ever-deepening and expanding wealth of knowledge on the works first started by Niels Bohr, a contemporary of Albert Einstein, who, while Albert Einstein delivered special and general relativity, he would, in his latter years, spend months debating Niels Bohr about quantum mechanics, because though many of its tests were yielding results, Einstein would call it spooky mechanics. He seems to have died, faced the end of his life and died in a state of perhaps morbid panic about what the future world would have to contend with if this field of study, quantum mechanics, was to really grow and build off the works of Niels Bohr. Now, So that's why Einstein called it spooky mechanics. One thing that pisses me off, there's a debate between Ray Comfort and the Rational Response Squad, an atheistic rational response movement in America, who I believe Kelly and Brian, they absolutely kicked the ass of Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron in a debate which you can find on YouTube. And you know, in complete errancy, Kirk Cameron cited Albert Einstein as a believer in God. He used some euphemistic, allegorical, symbological expressions like God does not play dice with the universe. And there are frequent quotes like that which religious people will try to use to invoke and promote the idea that Einstein is on the side of the Christian right-wing theist movement. But then if you look deeper into Albert Einstein's quotes, just Google Albert Einstein quotes about God, and you'll find him saying things like, I cannot believe in an anthropomorphic God who works on reward and punishment. Anyone who is motivated by reward or punishment after death, would be a sorry person indeed. I see him in that case as alluding to the wisdom of what we now see being substantiated in the works of modern atheist materialists like Michael Martin, George H. Smith, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Carrier, Richard Dawkins, and all these writers who have made very elaborate cases to say that moral character does not require belief in a theistic God at all. We do not need to take our morals from a totalitarian supernatural dictator. To summarize Sam Harris's proposal in his book, The Moral Landscape, he talks about if an exchange between you and somebody else promotes and enhances their well-being, he says if we had a world that was just comprised of rocks and there were no sentient life on it, and there were no lizards, there were no paramecium, just rocks, then none of those rocks would have any sorts of value systems, and nothing would mean anything to them. Whether a rock sat on a mountaintop for 200 years or whether it was thrown, off a cliff, the value system of that rock isn't going to change at all. You need to have organisms with conscious systems to appreciate value or the impediment of value. So Sam Harris argues in The Moral Landscape, in short, that any kind of exchange that enhances the well-being of a conscious creature is arguably a good action, whereas any action that detracts from conscious well-being, he suggests is evil. And this is a massive improvement on the weak Christian suggestion that only after you die will you be, like it's a high school test, will you be graded by this God who in the Bible we see is a constant monster. Anyone dying just to be judged by that God has either not read their Bible properly, not read the Little Red Hen properly, not read their childhood stories properly, and I would really advise and encourage people to check into books that are on what atheists will subcategorize into, notions of subjective and objective morality, and to find out what it means to them. Questioning everything, of course. It's good to be Socratic toward all philosophy. I'm even wondering if in the Bronze Age, the wisdom of the Greeks, the Socratic Greeks, was somehow really respected, because although in the story of Jesus we have we have Pontius Pilate and the Roman guard mixed in with this, the King Herod and his silent queen. So for me, it's very easy to imagine Jesus as a first century bisexual, because if that was just his nature, and the Judaistic sect didn't know how to make sense of him or comprehend him, but he just loved all the men and all the women that he knew, and the king and queen didn't have a word for bisexual. They conversely would have had biphobia, and they would have ruled and reigned, filled with biphobia. So Jesus, I just see as this nice guy that helped people and was going about his way, and then just suddenly gets irrationally questioned as to whether he considered himself the king of the Jews. I mean, presumably he never sat in a throne or made an order or anything like that as the king of the Jews. He seemed shocked by the question. If you read the transcript in Mark chapter 12, just the question alone seemed to have put him in a tailspin. I think no man who spends his life and ministry they call it his ministry, but his life in his 30s going around helping the sick and the poor, that's obviously a servant's ethic. And if that's what he wanted to do, he's gonna be proud of it. He's not gonna want to voluntarily carry a crucifix up a hill just to be nailed to it. So something had to put his mind into such a volatile state, which I can only imagine to have been a very sad and hysterical state of mind that he kept private to himself. He gets asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" and he doesn't know how to take it. He says, "Well, you said it," when in fact they asked him. So that's the only point. That's, as an atheist, that's the only thing I want Christians or people contemplating ending their Christianity to think about is, why do we have this Gospel of Mark, which your Bible puts after Matthew, in which the trial transcript shows that at worst Jesus was asked if he was the king of the Jews, and his reply was, "Well, you said it, not well, you asked me." So as far as Bible studiers go, that means he did not comprehend the question. The question felt to him like a statement or a direction. So he just said, "Well, you said it." And that's not literally correct. And that's our earliest gospel. So therefore, in our earliest gospel on Jesus' trial, he was asked if he was the king of the Jews. He said to his accuser, "Well, you said it, not well, you asked me." So he didn't even get to answer the question. And I think he was put into, I don't know what the word is for the mind, for the state of his mind at that time. As I've said, I can only imagine him being suicidal, kind of going, "What the? Huh? Why'd you ask me that? What do you mean? I'm not the king of the Jews. When did I say I was the king of the Jews? I don't particularly like the monarchy. I just help people. Why are you accusing me of being the king of the Jews?" And that's what brings me back to wondering if he was bisexual, because bisexual love would have meant that he would do his best to love all the men and women that he would cross paths with. Obviously, kings and queens weren't operating that way, so if he was creating some kind of cultural, he had some style about him that was impressing his peers and his community, I can see it triggering envy, jealousy, King Herod and his queen going, well, who the fuck is this man? How come he's having this effect on our people? And what do we call him? And there was no word for bisexual, and they were definitely biphobic, you know. Male to male affections were punished to death by stoning. One thing that I think is a clue to Jesus possibly being bisexual is the fact that in all the accounts of his nature as described in the Gospels, we don't know what King Herod's queen thought of Jesus. And we don't even know, do we even know directly of an exchange between King Herod and Jesus himself? Or did King Herod have to send a dispatch? Did he have to, you know, have someone offer Judas 30 silver coins? So the king and queen were standoffish, wanting to kill him, too gutless to confront him face to face. And they don't want to say, and that's what we notice in the later Gospels, is they don't want to say that this man just died because of the nature of his heart. And because of the stench of Christianity polluting even politics now, you know, like it's no gain for me that we now have a Christian prime minister. Even in this state of disabling physical pain, I would debate him publicly if he wanted, because to spend a decade working in a private sector pharmacy group that, from all managers' speech, I couldn't find one. I can think of one pharmacist who was possibly thought bisexual health rights mean something. But that's not enough for me. I mean, I think the whole LGBT community, their rights deserve to be this. This movement really is quite new. It kicked off in the 1960s with, you know, there's a story of a bisexual chick making a great stand. There was the artist Patti Smith, famous for the song Rock and Roll Nigger, which my Baptist Marilyn Manson covered in 1995. There's David Bowie, who has made more albums than anyone else I can think of, like 50 albums in his career. And he was a huge supporter of the bisexual rights movement. And because supernaturalist Christians want to insist that Jesus ascended into outer space, you know, the scientist Carl Sagan told Bishop John Spong that according to his astronomical calculations, even if Jesus had ascended in 33 AD to heaven, and they thought the earth was flat and heaven was above the clouds and that earth had four corners to it, so Jesus ascending to heaven would be like a rocket launch. It would be like more spectacular technologically and scientifically than the moon landing, because he didn't need a rocket ship. He didn't need Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and one giant leap for mankind. You know, all he needed was to get nailed to a cross with metal and a crown of thorns, and a loincloth and no oxygen supply, and jettison into the Milky Way galaxy's depths. And that's quite a feat for a Bronze Age man. According to every knowledge of anatomy, though, he would have run out of breath within, 12 20 seconds outside of Earth's atmosphere. I think you last 20 seconds. But anyway, Carl Sagan had calculated and explained to Bishop Spong that even if Jesus ascended into heaven, and by heaven upside down by Marilyn Manson, but even if he ascended into heaven at the speed of light, he would still be in the Milky Way galaxy right now, even after 2,000 years. Well, hang on, 2,000, yeah. Once we get to 2033, it will be exactly 2,000 years. But according to Carl Sagan's calculations, he would still be in our galaxy somewhere. And it just irks me that, you know, any politician turning to a scientist in principle is wanting to know about the logistics of things. They're wanting to know about scientific logic. They're wanting to know about reason. They're wanting to know about causality. They're wanting to know about the mechanics of the mind, body. And yet, you know, they tell us that they're here to somehow enlighten this land that was stolen from these Aborigines by bringing more fucking goddamn... I say goddamn, I spell it GAWDAMN, because I don't want it to be construed that I am waxing expletives to a deity. It's more like a satirical breakdown. I learned it from one of my mentors, Cliff Walker, a gentleman who's now dead, sadly, from, I think it was Toronto. I'd have to reread my old files, but we had many email exchanges after I left church, and he had a really beautiful mind. It's a shame that they've closed down his website, positiveatheism.org, because mine and his interviews were stored there, and he at some point wanted me to help sustain his website. But I've saved all the content of my exchanges with him. This hypocrisy with Roger Toll is that he does indeed love licking the celebrity taint. I noticed it at first when I was DJing at a conference. I don't think I in retrospect should have DJ'd for Capital Chemist, because I'm the one who introduced DJing in principle to their conference options. I was their first DJ, and I got paid with a massage chair, which I recently gave to a neighbour because I'm here in a flash and gone without a trace. But he likes Boston, and they were all saying to me, make sure you play Roger's favourite song. It's More Than a Feeling by Boston. I studied the lyrics of it, because Gary Cans, he would conferences dress up like Kiss. Who's the one from Kiss with a star on his eyes? So, I found I don't enjoy him in my audience. That one show, if I had just kept my at the start I was like, DJing is such a great break from what goes on in the stores, and maybe that would change if I entertained them. That was the thing I was thinking. Maybe certain lines of speech would come to an end, and I'd have equal standing as a staff member. But that didn't happen, so now he gets a bit for what he likes to say about appearances meaning certain things. Like, he can tell what your appearance means. He can probably tell you what me doing this with my hood means right now. It means that I'm concealing an incident of sexual embarrassment between my oldest stepsister when I was 7. If I lift this up, it was my second oldest stepsister, and if I pull this all the way down to my mouth, it was my just 9-month oldest stepsister. yeah, he does have wacky theories about appearances. And then at the conference, he'll dress up in a Roman toga with a sort of Caesar or Nero, you know, those wreaths they wear around the head. He'll have a gold one of them on, dancing with his wife to More Than a Feeling. Only recently did I consider that More Than a Feeling could be about like when he bashes her at home. Or like intellectually owns her. I don't want to pry. I don't pry like the way he is known for his prying. So 3 minutes 30. Time to go home. So the topic of misrepresentation in press has been one I learnt about very young. I'm not the biggest fan of media reports because if a report is in the press is on something that has been dealt with officially through a court hearing or series of court hearings, then what can happen is that the knowledge of the type of event and the key points of that event are not necessarily reflected or represented in a press report, and so therefore you know, those even to the end of to the extent the person charged with who was the worst offending person in a party or a group of people that made it to the attention of the courts, those that party can be not adequately represented in a press report. So a press report can make a person seem worse or far worse than they actually are or were. And so, you know, that can lead to all other sorts of disastrous opinions being formed by those who become familiar with the press report about a case that went to court but aren't familiar with the court case. And that could be devastating to anyone connected to anyone in any reports of any court transcripts. The families and such and such and such. So yeah, because of that I'm selective reader. Largely because of that. It's also a taste thing. I do not particularly stand for I mean, my favorite artist has been fucking misrepresented to the shithouse by certain journalists. And I love the way that he deals with it. But yeah, in many ways, I'm in similar boat where third-party organizations could go, well, let's pull what files we can on my history, going back to childhood, and then they could read an article that will then, given their school lessons on genetics and what people say about genetics and what the Bible says about sins coming through the bloodlines, and it is not right, I don't think, to judge someone on the basis of a press report. And therefore I'm selective about what media sources I am open to comprehending to be credible, and that trait I've always had. I'm not much a fan of Murdoch or any kind of right-wing press or organization where there's a religious believer running the show. I've never cared for. You see a lot of the kissing of the celebrity taint in these articles. I mean, I'm not the biggest Jimmy Barnes fan, but I read an article in, I think it was a Telegraph, and the headline was "Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Heap," and so the writer of that article is hoping that you will admire the article or take an interest in reading it because the title is satirical of a Jimmy Barnes song. So they're licking the celebrity taint. But the article just might as well be about, a Jimmy Barnes fan dying from cocaine, and Jimmy Barnes has been known to use cocaine, so they want to blame Jimmy Barnes. So I can see these sort of journos, indicting art and using art, wanting to indict art while using the credentials and credibility of artists, both as the hook to make you interested in reading the article, and then at the same time wanting to say that certain forms of art or art in general could be or is responsible for evils in the world, and it's usually the types of people to have narrow-minded, dogmatic views of evil, misfortune, and things like that, and to say that it's the fault of art. So I see them as those types of articles, with the headline that they've only written that headline that way because they want that artist's success to be the hook for why you read the article. But then they'll just as quickly write the article about how art is destroying civilization as we know it. And then there's a bald guy at the top running the media company, saying things like "bury your mistakes," because that's the first rule of credible journalists with integrity. It's to bury your mistakes. So I don't think. I would say what I learned in school about journalism was not an impediment to taking an interest in writing, as I did later, some years after school. But yeah, I couldn't work in that sort of environment. Yeah, because, well, now you know. But I'm actually sensitive to how truly horrible a person's life could become if there are sensitive considerations that a person needs to have towards if they're going to be rightful in their conduct. If someone's indirectly targeted and picked on for a matter that the judgment that they formed, but to have that go at them was on the basis of their conjecture after reading a press report, but ignoring and not considering the view of the courts. I'm getting low on memory. DETERIORNATION. Hello, I'm going to hand you over to my friend Matty. He's got a 10-second speech.
Eat shit and die, motherfucker.
That's right, you all need to check into this YouTube channel and eat shit and die. I would say especially to the religious right, but Matty I think... Do you want everyone to eat shit and die, Matty?
No. Peace and be with him.
He's unsure. Make your own choice. If you want to eat shit and die, you can eat shit and die. Otherwise, I'm getting drunk.
Peace.
Hi, welcome to Sunday. I just was looking up the word repressed because the term religiously repressed has been used around me, and so and to me, I don't know if it was been used in relation to me, but you look up the word repressed and it talks about keeping things in and holding back, and well, I feel in my case there are a lot of things I have to say concerning religion. All of which pretty much center around the logically fallacious and the not worth believing. It's nothing like a religious. It's not like some of the testimonies people give where they talk like it was a heartbreak in its own right. Definitely for some years I've been at a point of being certainly willing to engage with and test various previous mentors and leaders in debates, and I've extended invitations to debates. Some just haven't been followed up on. But yeah, I mean, if it's the church, if it's the institution, the church, that is making certain claims about being in possession of the truth, and anyone in search of the truth or who values truth in life would invariably stand to benefit from what a church has to offer, and so you investigate their claims, and their claims don't hold. Well, okay, then you get over that, and yeah, so I'm not sure. I just find I don't like the term repressed. I mean, what becomes something that you wasted your time and effort on, and were deceived? I mean, the proudest point that the believers I knew would appeal to was like a certain, I guess it was like 4th century type of dedication to faith, Josephus, like post Josephus, like these people believed so hard they were prepared to give their lives for the faith. I'm like, well, it's great. Were they prepared to argue and win arguments? Because if they were prepared to try that, they may have discovered that these concepts are so thick and daft that you would want to threaten us all with burning forever in order to try to increase your count of affirmative believers. So the term, what ended up becoming a veil of lies and deception and errors and logical fallacies, becomes inspiration for creativity and enlightenment at the next turning point in life. And so I mean, that's why I started the book. It's why I started getting involved in online writing, emailing and online debates in the like soon after the Y2K bug didn't go off, and our computers still worked. So yeah. Yeah, I scarcely, the word belief is almost gone from my, it was more or less self-educated out of my vocabulary in the early part of this decade, early first few years, and then the challenge is if you can go and try and find a forum and find the nerdiest person on the forum and see if they can put forward arguments. You end up learning through a bunch of argumentative exercises what the key issues are, you know, free will and determinism, cosmology, evolution or intelligent design, why does morality exist, all these sorts of avenues. Is humanism an adequate enough model to account for various schools of thought that are currently monopolized on by different religions, or it goes on and on, but I don't really think in terms of repressed. If you are made to feel at a time that you are holding a lot of things back, I always love this line, fail to see the tragic, turn it into magic, was an attitude, more of an attitude that, it's from a song called Dope Hat by Marilyn Manson from his first album, Portrait of an American Family, and I just think it's a very cool line. Anyway, Buy Gippsland Dairy, mango, passion fruit, twist yogurt, from your local capital chemist. Deterioration.
Luke Banton's Deterioration. Ruined my life.
Ruined your life.
Can't watch it ever again.
What's wrong with it?
I don't know.
Beyond all recognition. Fucked up.
It's fucked up beyond all recognition. It's just really bad.
My webisode series is FUBAR. That's it. That's what it means. That's the initialism. FUBAR.
Oh wow, that's pretty trippy.
Alright, the show's not doing very well. What will we do? Come back to the webisodes.